In the heart of a vanished jungle empire, one buried beneath centuries of dirt, blood, and bones, there lived a man who called himself both emperor and husband of a goddess. He ruled not with law, but with fear, not with reason, but with ritual. And his goddess hungered. Each moonrise, the people gathered to worship her. She sat on a throne of jaguar bones, veiled in human skin, surrounded by flickering torches and the stench of decay. And as drums thundered and priests chanted, the emperor would deliver his offering, an infant, a warrior, a woman whose only sin was being chosen. To question the ritual was heresy. To doubt the emperor was death. And as long as the sacrifices flowed, the crops grew, the rain fell, and the empire thrived. But what happens when a god demands too much? When the people begin to vanish by the hundreds? When the line between devotion and madness is obliterated? This isn't mythology. It's history, real, horrific, and almost forgotten. Until now. Welcome to the blood-drenched reign of Emperor Tepiltsin of Xochimilco, the man who fed an empire to his goddess bride. And what archaeologists found buried beneath her temple changes everything. Now we begin at the very start, when love, power, and darkness first collided. They say she came from lightning. The night was unholy, choked in ash, black with storm clouds, lit only by the fury of a volcano that had not roared in a century. Villagers fled into the forest as the ground split beneath them and boiling rivers carved through their maize fields. And then the fire stopped, just as suddenly as it began. At the center of it all stood a girl, barefoot, untouched by flame, swaddled in smoke and glowing with a faint, otherworldly light. She was found at the base of the obsidian cliffs of Popocatépetl, just beyond the old sacrificial steps. No one knew her name. No one knew her parents. She did not speak. She only smiled. The priest said she had been born from the earth itself, birthed from the mountain's rage, a gift from the gods, sent to restore balance after a season of blight and death. They named her Ixchiltana, after two ancient deities, one of moonlight, one of blood, a goddess hybrid, a divine omen. And the people believed. She was brought to the temple of Xochimilco, the floating city of flowers and death. There, she was raised among priests and serpents, draped in the skins of sacrificial virgins, bathed in obsidian water, and fed only the hearts of birds. Her eyes were said to glow red under the full moon. Her blood never spilled. By age 12, she was no longer a girl, but something else entirely. And that's when Tepiltsin saw her. Tepiltsin was the heir of Xochimilco's throne, born into a legacy of jaguar warriors and skull-masked kings. But he was no ordinary prince. He was obsessed with purity, divine union, and prophecy, haunted by dreams of a woman bathed in fire, calling him to rule as god, not man. When he laid eyes on Ixchiltana, he fell to his knees. Not from lust, from terror. He claimed her as his bride before the elders, declaring their union preordained by the gods themselves. The council objected. She was too young, too strange, too not of this world. But the omens were undeniable. Crops had begun to regrow. Rain returned to the dying canals. Even the frogs, long silent, began to sing. And so they were wed, before the entire city, beneath a blood-red moon. The ceremony was grotesque. The bride wore a crown of human teeth. Her veil was soaked in lamb's blood. Instead of exchanging vows, Tepiltsin carved a symbol into her chest, the eye of Huitzilopochtli, the war god. She did not flinch. What began as a political stunt quickly mutated into something far more sinister. Because soon after their union, Tepiltsin changed. He no longer took counsel from the priests. He spoke only to her. He stopped eating cooked food, claiming the goddess demanded it raw. He banned childbirth for a season, claiming the next generation must be born under her blessing. And when the first famine came, he ordered the unthinkable. He offered his people to her as food. At first, only the dying and diseased were taken, then the criminals, then the dissenters. But by the end of the third harvest, anyone could be chosen. It was said that the temple had a hunger of its own, that her throne pulsed with warmth, that her breath smelled of copper. The empress never aged, never spoke, only watched, with eyes that never blinked. And as fear took root in the empire, a new myth was born. To feed her is to be reborn. To deny her is to disappear. But buried beneath this divine horror was a question no one dared ask. Who, or what, was she really? Because not all gods are divine. Some are made, others are summoned. Tepiltsin was never meant to rule alone. That was the old way: rule by counsel, rule by bloodlines, rule by the will of the gods. But after marrying the living goddess, he didn't just rewrite tradition, he destroyed it. 3 days after their wedding, the high council of elders vanished. Not all at once, not in ceremony, but one by one. Each member of the council found dismembered in a different sacred site. One had their heart removed and nailed to the temple of rain. Another was sewn inside the skin of a deer and left to rot beneath the marketplace. A third was buried alive under the empress's chamber, discovered decades later by archaeologists, his skull shattered from the inside. No one claimed responsibility, but Tepiltsin issued a decree immediately after the last body was found. He was emperor now, not king, not prince, emperor. And his authority came not from blood or conquest, but from her, the living goddess, Ixchiltana. At his coronation, he appeared draped in leopard pelts, streaked in human ash, wearing a crown of turquoise blades said to have been taken from the mouth of a serpent god. But it wasn't his regalia that horrified the people, it was the ritual. Instead of prayers, the emperor stood silently and slit the throat of a priest. Instead of incense, he burned the scrolls of ancient law in front of the crowd. And instead of pledging to protect his people, he knelt before his bride and whispered, "I am yours." That was the beginning of the Jaguar cult, the elite warrior class that served only the empress and carried out her will without question. They painted their faces to mimic her, white skulls, black eyes, streaks of blood across their mouths. Their initiation required them to bring a human offering to the temple and flay it alive. Only then were they granted the mark of the claw, a bone talon driven into the palm. Soon, Xochimilco was no longer a city of canals and floating gardens. It was a city of silence. Whispers of what happened inside the temple leaked only through escaped slaves and half-mad survivors. They spoke of golden rooms coated in dried blood, of floors that moved beneath your feet, of the empress bathing in bowls of spinal fluid. Some claimed she could speak to the dead. Others said she was the dead. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: Tepiltsin was no longer a man. He had become a vessel. He claimed to speak only what she told him. Laws were passed through her dreams. Executions were carried out based on her gaze alone. Entire families were taken in the night if the empress wept in her sleep. But here's what's truly unsettling. For a time, it worked. The people who obeyed were fed. The empire expanded. Trade increased. No foreign kingdom dared to invade, fearing the wrath of the living goddess. Her temple became a place of pilgrimage for those desperate enough to trade a child for a prophecy, a husband for a healing. And Tepiltsin reveled in it. He became known as the Jaguar of the divine womb, the bridegroom of the deathless queen, and worst of all, the voice between the veil. He declared himself immortal, began drinking mercury mixed with blood, refused to sleep anywhere but beneath her feet. Even in public ceremonies, he would eat from her hand like a dog. But madness doesn't announce itself all at once. It creeps in, and it waits. Because the more he fed her, the more she demanded. And the line between ruler and ruled began to blur. There are inscriptions, barely legible now, carved beneath the temple's obsidian base. Scholars once believed they were sacred poetry, but new translations suggest something else entirely. A warning: the mouth will never close. She does not love. She only hungers. It began as a celebration. The second anniversary of Tepiltsin's marriage to the living goddess was declared the most sacred day in the empire. No labor, no trade, no funerals, only worship. It would be remembered as the day Xochimilco stood still. The city was dressed in crimson and black. Skulls floated in the canals, painted with soot and powdered bone, while dancers smeared in clay reenacted the tale of her birth from the fire. But this anniversary would mark a turning point, a ritual so obscene, so unspeakably grotesque, that even the most devout began to question whether they were worshipping a goddess or a monster. At the center of the Grand Plaza, a stage had been erected from polished obsidian, stretching 40 feet high. The people were told this was to be a divine union, a symbolic renewal of the emperor's vow to his goddess bride. But no one expected what came next. 50 women, all virgins between the ages of 12 and 16, were chosen by imperial decree to serve as bridesmaids of the void. They were not told what this meant. Their families were honored. Feast offerings were made. Their hair was shorn and oiled. And then they were gone. When the crowd gathered, they saw the girls bound naked to a great wheel of jaguar bone, an ancient torture device once used by warring tribes, now resurrected for ceremonial spectacle. Tepiltsin emerged in a robe stitched from infant skulls. In one hand, he held a torch dipped in human fat. In the other, a knife of flint carved with serpentine symbols. Behind him stood Ixchiltana, still, silent, watching. As the drums reached a deafening tempo, the emperor raised the torch and declared, "Let this blood bind our world to hers." One by one, he opened their throats. Not in haste, but with surgical care. Slowly, deliberately, letting the blood pour down a channel that fed into a bowl at her feet. She did not blink, did not move. But when the bowl was full, she drank. She drank it all. And the crowd cheered, because they believed this was salvation. That the deaths meant fertility, wealth, rain. And for a time, it did. The next harvest was unprecedented. Fishermen reported shoals of silver fish leaping into their boats. Flowers bloomed out of season. Even the sick began to recover. But the goddess was not satisfied. She never was. Because exactly 13 nights later, 50 more girls disappeared. Not from noble homes. From the lower districts. The slums. The forgotten. And this time, no ceremony followed. No declaration. No feast. Only silence. Rumors spiraled like smoke. That they had been taken underground. That the temple had catacombs. That the empress had grown bored of mere blood, and now demanded organs, living organs. One escaped. She staggered into the marketplace half-naked and delirious, covered in cuts and blackened burns. Her tongue had been partially removed, but she managed to speak 3 words before collapsing in front of a shrine. She's not human. She died before she could explain. Her body was never returned to her family. Tepiltsin ordered the shrine destroyed. In its place, he built a new statue of Ixchiltana devouring a child whole. The message was clear: the goddess gives, and the goddess takes. From that moment, the empire changed. The air grew heavier. People began avoiding the temples. Priests stopped smiling. Children no longer played near the canals. Even the animals began acting strangely. Dogs whined at nothing, birds stopped singing, and jaguars circled the temple at night, growling at shadows. Historians now refer to this shift as the darkening, a collective dread that took root after the bloodletting, a spiritual collapse disguised as devotion. But there's a deeper secret hidden in the temple records, recently unearthed from beneath a collapsed archive vault. A single entry, written in blood, not ink. She moves when I sleep. She feeds without me. Signed, Tepiltsin. The temple was not just a place of worship. It was a mouth, a living, breathing organism carved from obsidian and limestone, pulsing with secrets, built atop ruins far older than the empire itself. Even the name of the original site had been lost to time, its true purpose swallowed in oral traditions too dangerous to speak aloud. To outsiders, it was magnificent. Twin towers of black stone reaching toward the sun, flanked by staircases lined with gold skulls and flayed jaguar pelts. But for those who entered, truly entered, it became something else entirely. They called it Tiapan Zakaket Sali, Temple of the Flower that Devours. The name was ironic. There were no flowers, only bones. It was said to have no fixed layout, that it shifted depending on who entered. Corridors looped in on themselves. Shadows fell the wrong way. Walls bled. More than one priest had disappeared during his rounds, only for his skeleton to be found days later fused into the stone, screaming silently with mouth agape. The empress never left it. Her throne sat in the sanctum of offering, directly above the Tlaltic pact Zikli, the Earth's navel, a sacred pit carved deep into the planet's crust, rumored to be older than the gods themselves. Tepiltsin claimed it was where her power emerged from the underworld. He forbade any non-anointed from looking into it. But according to stolen testimonies from exiled scribes, the pit didn't lead to stone or fire. It led to flesh. Wet, living, pulsing flesh. And the empress would feed directly from it. The cult of the living goddess grew rapidly after the bloodletting. It attracted the broken, the diseased, the fanatical, women who had lost children, men who heard voices, orphans, cripples, widows, all promised salvation through pain. Initiation rituals were brutal. New acolytes were flayed at the thighs, their skin burned into scrolls. They drank hallucinogenic potions brewed from crushed bone and red fungus, and chanted prayers in a language that predates Nahuatl by centuries, believed to have been taught directly by the goddess herself. They spoke not of love, nor hope, nor eternal reward. They worshipped consumption, devouring, surrender of the self into the endless hunger of the divine. One chant, etched repeatedly across temple walls, reads, "To be eaten is to be seen. To be seen is to be unmade. To be unmade is to be free." Piltson began to fade from public life around this time. He stopped appearing at feasts or ceremonies. His likeness was removed from murals. Edicts were issued solely through the high priestess of the cult, an emaciated woman known only as La Voz de Ella, the voice of her. Some said the emperor was dying. Others said he was evolving. But a handful of captured cultists, interrogated under torture in secret chambers far from the capital, said something far worse, that Piltson no longer needed to speak. She had taken his voice. And worse still, he no longer slept. Instead, he stood motionless at her side, eyes open, weeping blood. Meanwhile, the temple expanded, not upward, but downward. Under the empress's orders, diggers carved deeper into the earth, creating what became known as the womb, a complex of tunnels, pits, and organic chambers where offerings were stored, processed, and absorbed. Archaeologists today believe these chambers were lined with a mix of volcanic rock and, disturbingly, human tissue. Samples taken from preserved wall segments show the presence of collagen, calcium, and DNA markers consistent with multiple bloodlines fused together. It wasn't symbolic. It wasn't decoration. The temple was growing, and whatever lived at the bottom of that pit, it was alive. Despite the terror, the empire flourished. Trade routes opened. Food was abundant. Disease declined, but only for those who obeyed. For the rest, there was only one fate. Because the temple didn't just eat the dead. It learned to eat the living. Sometimes slowly, sometimes piece by piece. Why didn't they stop it? Why didn't the people rise up, burn the temple, overthrow the emperor, in the madness? Because terror works better than any god. And Piltson, or what was left of him, perfected it. After the blood wedding and the rise of the cult, the city of Xochimilco entered a new era, one that modern scholars refer to as the Season of Tongues, named for the punishment that became synonymous with disobedience, the removal of the tongue, followed by public hanging from the temple walls. Not just criminals, not just rebels, anyone. A mother who cried too loudly at her daughter's abduction, a merchant who questioned the number of daily offerings, a boy who accidentally dropped a bowl of rice during a procession. They called it La Muda Roja, the Red Silence. Entire districts of the city fell into quiet submission. No laughter, no conversation, only prayers, whispers, and the low rhythmic moans that echoed from the temple at night, what the cult called her breathing. But this was not passive terror. It was designed. You see, the empress did not feast randomly. The harvests were chosen strategically. There was always a reason, always a justification. And this was what broke the people. Because the sacrifices started to make sense. The corrupt were offered, and corruption slowed. The violent were taken, and crime dropped. The sick were harvested, and the plague receded. There was a grim equilibrium, a system, a logic. And so, ordinary people began to rationalize it, to tell themselves the goddess only devoured what was already spoiled, that those taken had, in some unseen way, deserved it. It wasn't faith. It was moral surrender. And once a people surrender their judgment, their outrage, their voice, they become something else entirely, flesh. Nothing more. The cult took full advantage. They created quotas. Each district required to offer a certain number of bodies per month, under pain of collective punishment. If a neighborhood failed, all its children would be taken. They called it Tetel Huli, the stone debt. Families turned on each other. Fathers offered sons. Sisters betrayed mothers. In the southern quarter, a baker famously handed over his twin daughters just to avoid exile. He was later rewarded with a necklace of their teeth, carved into prayer beads. And then came the offering lotteries. These were the empire's most ingenious act of psychological warfare. Games of chance, celebrated with music and food, where citizens volunteered to spin the wheel of rebirth. The winner would be sacrificed on the altar, cheered by the crowd. Winners were promised reincarnation as birds or stars. Their families were fed for a year. It was horrifying. And yet, people volunteered. They cheered. They wept. They celebrated. Because the alternative, living in constant dread of random disappearance, was worse. To choose your death was to reclaim your soul. Or so they told themselves. But even this system had a cost. Each year, the quotas increased. Each year, the goddess demanded more. And with it came a slow erosion of humanity. The city grew quieter. The eyes of its people, once proud, once sharp, began to dim. They aged rapidly, grew frail, lost color in their skin. Modern anthropologists, studying remains from this period, found mass malnutrition despite abundant food stores. Even those not taken by the temple were deteriorating, as if the city itself had become parasitic, as if merely living near her presence siphoned away the will to live. There's one inscription, carved in charcoal beneath a roof tile in the eastern ward. Likely the last words of a doomed father hiding his family. It is better to be devoured than to remain. Because even when she does not eat you, she still takes something. So why didn't they rebel? Because there was nothing left to rebel with. They had become offerings in waiting. And to Piltson, he watched it all from the steps of the temple, unmoving, unblinking. His skin now paper-thin, stretched like leather over a frame too tall, too wrong. He was no longer her husband. He was her priest, her servant, her mouth. They say the dead began to whisper first, not the freshly sacrificed, not those who screamed on the altar or vanished into the womb. The older dead, those long buried in the floating gardens, those sealed behind the temple walls, bones blackened by time, forgotten by even the gods. They began to return. It started small, unmarked graves unearthed with no sign of weather or animal disturbance. Skeletons reassembled in unnatural ways. Skulls arranged in spirals outside doorsteps. Children waking in the night, clutching their chests, whispering, "She's watching through the bones." But what shook the empire was the bloodless dead. Dozens of corpses began appearing across the city, standing upright, intact, and perfectly preserved. Not embalmed, not decayed, just empty, eyes frozen, mouths sealed with strands of black sinew, as if their souls had been siphoned out through some ancient, unseen wound. Piltson declared them blessed. Chosen watchers, he called them, vessels for the goddess's gaze. But the people didn't believe him anymore. A slow, forbidden rebellion had begun, not in sword or flame, but in memory, in the reclamation of stories long buried by the cult. Underground, secret gatherings bloomed, held beneath old shrines, in dry riverbeds, in the bellies of gutted homes. Survivors and defectors spoke of the world before the goddess, of temples that fed the spirit, not the mouth, of gods who demanded song, not flesh. They were called the Whisperers. No formal leaders, no structure, only a belief that memory was resistance, and that the dead, too, could rebel. One woman in particular became legend. Her name was Akalua, a midwife whose children had both been chosen in the same season. Rather than mourn, she vanished, reappeared weeks later wearing a mask of reeds, carrying a scroll bound in dried skin. It contained only one phrase, repeated again and again. The wound can be sealed with fire. She became a ghost among the people, appearing in alleyways to deliver forbidden prayers, marking doors with bloodless handprints, tearing down cultist banners in the night. The voice of her, the high priestess, declared Akalua a heretic and issued a bounty of 5 sacrifices for anyone who captured her. No one tried. Because Akalua was doing something no one else dared. She was listening to the dead. She claimed they spoke from the walls, from the canals, from the mouths of children in their sleep. That they wanted to be remembered, not feared. That every offering devoured by the temple left behind a whisper. And that if the people listened closely enough, those whispers could become a scream. And then, for the first time in years, the temple bled. It happened during the festival of the second moon. The cult had arranged a grand devouring. 200 chosen offerings gathered from across the empire. Akalua infiltrated the temple disguised as an acolyte. What she did inside remains a mystery, But by sunrise, blood was pouring down the obsidian walls from within, not from sacrifice, from the stone itself. Tepiltsin fell into seizure. The empress screamed for the first time, and in the chaos, the people saw something they had not seen in years: fear. On her face, the rebellion had begun, not with fire, not with blades, but with silence broken. The cult retaliated with unspeakable violence. Districts were razed. Entire neighborhoods vanished. The rivers turned black. And yet, Akalua's scrolls began appearing everywhere, buried in bread, hidden inside children's toys, etched into animal skins. Each with the same phrase: "The womb can be sealed with fire." What did it mean? Was it metaphor? Or was there, buried beneath the temple, a heart? One that could bleed, one that could die. But the rebellion wouldn't get the chance to find out, because something far worse was coming. Something stirred beneath the womb, and she began to change. It began with the bells. Not the ceremonial bells of prayer or offering, but the old ones. Rusted and half-forgotten, hung in towers built centuries before Tepiltsin's reign. They rang without wind, without touch, without permission. It was the dead who rang them, or so the people believed. The Feast of the Thousand was meant to be the greatest sacrifice in the history of Xochimilco. 1,000 souls, hand-selected over an entire year, to mark the ascension of Ixchiltana. The empress had not spoken or moved in weeks. Her eyes sealed, her skin pallid. Tepiltsin claimed she was withdrawing from flesh, preparing to become the city itself. To feed her, the cult needed more than offerings. They needed an event, a spectacle. So they turned the entire city into a theater of death. The chosen were bound and paraded in cages, each one forced to wear a mask crafted from the bones of the previous year's sacrifices. They were starved for 7 days, then given hallucinogenic mushrooms and paraded before the crowds like cattle on market day. The empire gathered from all corners to witness what would be called the Night of Becoming. But no one became anything except terror. As the final offerings were dragged to the temple stairs, something in the air changed. The torches dimmed. The drums faltered. The sky turned wrong. Not dark, not cloudy, but smeared with colors that had no name. Birds crashed from the sky. Dogs howled until their lungs collapsed. And the pit, the Tlaltikpak Zikli, the earth's navel, opened wider. Not cracked, not shifted, opened. And from it came her voice. Not speech, not song. Just sound. Raw, impossible sound. Eyewitnesses described it differently. Some heard screaming infants. Others heard their own names whispered in reverse. Others claimed their ears began to bleed, and they fell into seizures. One priest clawed out his eyes and shouted, "She is inside us all," before jumping into the pit. Tepiltsin stood at the edge, arms raised. "Let the goddess be made flesh," he declared. Then he stepped in. He was swallowed whole. And what emerged was not him. It wore his face, but the proportions were wrong. Taller, limbs too long, skin tight as drum hide, eyes boiling white, weeping black ichor. And behind it, she rose. The empress, once still and silent, now stood. Her feet didn't touch the floor. Her body hovered, shifting, flickering. Her form was unstable, flesh unraveling and reforming. Her mouth split sideways, revealing rows of jagged teeth, more shark than human. From her spine, long bone spires pierced the air like insect legs. She screamed. The sound tore through the temple, shattering stone. Statues cracked. The canals boiled. And 1,000 sacrifices, bound and waiting, burst apart like overripe fruit. No knife, no ritual, just her will. Their blood did not hit the ground. It rose, suspended in the air, forming runes and symbols that no one alive could read. Even the cultists recoiled. Some vomited. Some gouged their throats. Others dropped dead, heartbeats stopping mid-breath. But not the whisperers. They had prepared. From the rooftops, from the canals, from the tunnels beneath the city, they emerged carrying jars of fire, old-world oil, forbidden incense, relics of a forgotten war. Their mission was not to destroy her, but to burn the womb, to seal it, to starve her. They knew they couldn't kill a goddess. But maybe, just maybe, they could trap her. Akalua led them. Her mask cracked. Her robes torn. Her arms marked with the names of every child taken. She said only one word. Now. And they struck. Flames erupted from the base of the temple. Explosions shook the foundation. The obsidian cracked. The earth's navel groaned like a dying animal. For the first time, she screamed in pain. But it wasn't enough. Tepiltson, or the thing wearing him, descended into the fire, untouched. He walked through the flames like mist. And as he did, the blood in the air hardened, forming a shell, a cocoon, a protective carapace around her. The Whisperers had made a mistake. They had fed her more. 1,000 souls, all at once. And now, the goddess was becoming something else. Something without form. Something without limit. The city began to collapse. The canals flooded. The sky split. And then, silence. Not peace. Not calm. Absence. The temple disappeared. Vanished. No fire. No rubble. No ruin. Just a scorched crater where once stood the heart of Xochimilco. And one body, left behind at the edge of the void. A Kahlua, eyes open, smiling. In her clenched fist, archaeologists would one day find a fragment of scorched scroll. It read, "She is sealed. But she is not gone." Decades passed. The empire fell. Not with war, but with erasure. Maps were redrawn. Names forgotten. The jungle reclaimed what blood could not. Xochimilco, once a capital of divine terror, became myth. Whispers beneath the soil, erased from scripture, buried by empires desperate to forget. But the earth remembers. And the dead do not stay buried forever. In 1912, a team of workers digging a new canal near modern-day Mexico City struck something strange, a hollow echo beneath their tools. At first, they assumed it was a cave or sinkhole. But when they widened the opening, they found a stairwell descending into darkness. Obsidian walls, carvings of stars with open mouths, and bones, thousands of them, stacked in spirals, arranged in concentric circles, small, fragile, children. The Mexican government halted the project. Archaeologists were called in. What they discovered would remain classified for nearly a century. It was a mass tomb, not of war or famine, but ritual. And worse, it was deliberate architecture. The bones had been used to construct the foundation of something vast. A platform, a dais. Beneath it, carvings of a seated woman with jaguar legs, her hands dripping with serpents. Her face was absent. Literally, every carving had the face removed, violently hacked off, or chiseled out. They had tried to erase her. But her story lingered. In the sediment, they found traces of mercury, blood proteins, hallucinogenic compounds, and fetal tissue, all preserved by the unique volcanic soil. Even after hundreds of years, the underground chamber exuded an odor of rot and copper. Most disturbing was what they found at the chamber's center, a stone throne, flanked by two towering statues of flayed women. Beneath the throne, archaeologists uncovered a pit filled with infant skulls, each drilled precisely at the top, a technique used in pre-Columbian cranial rituals to release the spirit. But why children? Why only them? Because, according to newly unearthed codices buried nearby, Ixchiltana believed that children were the only truly untainted food, the only vessels capable of sustaining her forever. Their blood was pure, their fear was potent, and above all, their silence was eternal. That throne, it had been built from the remains of over 4,000 children. And one, just one, was not dead. At the far end of the chamber, in a sealed pod of volcanic glass, they found something impossible. A perfectly preserved corpse. A girl, maybe 11. Eyes closed. Arms folded across her chest. No decay. No smell. Carbon dating confirmed the unthinkable. She had been buried for nearly 500 years. But it wasn't death. She had not been embalmed. Her tissue was living. Her heart, though still, was intact. Her teeth clenched around something, a sliver of parchment. They extracted it, and found, written in dried blood, "She will rise if the mouth opens." The chamber was resealed. No official explanation given. The girl's body vanished into classified archives. The discovery buried beneath bureaucracy and fear. But the damage was done, because in the years that followed, strange events began to unfold. Multiple archaeologists from the dig team disappeared. One was found in a hotel room, mouth stuffed with feathers, eyes scratched out. Another vanished en route to a lecture in Oaxaca. One man, a junior researcher, claimed to hear whispering when he slept, in a voice not his own, "I remember your blood." He drowned himself days later in a canal lined with lilies. The same canal that once ran through Xochimilco. And worse still, urban legends returned. Children vanishing without trace. Bones appearing in gardens. A strange woman seen standing in mirrors, smiling, before fading. Locals began leaving food offerings near drainage gates. An unofficial shrine formed around the dig site. Candles, dolls, chicken hearts. The people had forgotten her name. But something in them remembered. Even now, investigators find evidence that someone, or something, has been digging beneath the city. Not building. Not destroying. Digging. And beneath it all, a sound. Low. Rhythmic. Wet. Like breathing. Tepiltsin was never seen again after the Feast of the Thousand. No body. No ash. No remains. Just absence. But in the centuries that followed, his presence never fully disappeared. His name lingered in forbidden prayers. His face surfaced in nightmares described by children across generations. And deep in the oral traditions of remote villages, far from official archives, there existed a single phrase repeated with dread. He still walks beside her. In the aftermath of the collapse, what little remained of the empire of Xochimilco fractured. The cult of the living goddess was scattered, its temples buried, its scrolls burned, its members hunted by rebel factions and early Christian missionaries. The few surviving priests fled into the mountains or died screaming in their cells, unable to form coherent words. But not all chose silence. One, Yowalan, a former high acolyte turned mad wanderer, was captured in 1546 and interrogated by Jesuit chroniclers. What he revealed would not be published until the 1800s, when a tattered manuscript known as the Codex of Unmaking surfaced in a monastery in Puebla. In it, Yowalan described the final moments before the fall in agonizing detail. He claimed Tepiltsin had not died, nor become God, but had merged with her. She consumed him not in flesh but in thought, he wrote. His soul unraveled into hers. His voice was hers now, his body a sheath. He lives only when she wishes it, sleeps in her breath, walks in her hunger. In essence, Tepiltsin had become her echo. A shadow, a haunting, no longer emperor, now, extension. There were rumors in the decades that followed of a figure wandering the highlands. Too tall, skin too taut, robes stitched with unfamiliar bones. He would appear near villages shortly before disasters, floods, famines, infant deaths. He spoke no words, but left behind symbols scorched into doorways, a bleeding eye, a weeping moon, a gaping mouth. Locals called him El Novio de la Muerte, the bridegroom of death. But what sealed his legend wasn't the sightings. It was the bones. Unmarked graves discovered in isolated regions, far from the known temples, containing ritual arrangements eerily identical to the lost rites of the goddess. In one remote cavern in the Sierra de Juarez, explorers found an altar carved into the living rock, surrounded by a ring of children's teeth and dried flowers. On the altar, a mural etched in ancient pigments, a man standing beside a woman with no face, his hand in hers, his eyes weeping. The same figure would appear again and again in unrelated findings across Mexico and Central America, spanning hundreds of years. Always beside her, always silent. And then, the return of the scrolls. Beginning in the late 1990s, fragments of old codices, long believed destroyed, began surfacing in black markets and private collections. Many were hoaxes, but some were real. One scroll, authenticated by experts at UNAM, contained a chilling prophecy believed to be Tepiltsin's final words, scrawled in blood and sap. I have swallowed the sun. She has eaten my shadow. We are the door now. When it opens, time will starve. It was dismissed as poetic madness, until two archaeologists who had handled the scroll were found dead within a week. One suffocated in her sleep, mouth packed with petals. The other was discovered in a museum storage room, kneeling, face carved into a grin with obsidian. Security footage showed him enter alone. No one else was seen. Still, the academic world labeled it coincidence, delusion, superstition. But one quiet researcher, a linguist named Dr. Rosario Iturbide, refused to let it go. She traced the scroll's dialect to a proto-language only found in 3 places: the base carvings of the Xochimilco pit, the Codex of Unmaking, a sealed vault beneath the remains of a Jesuit mission in Veracruz. She opened the vault in 2012 and found something she never spoke of. All she left behind was a single sentence in her research log. He's still waiting. She's still hungry. And someone is going to open the door. Dr. Iterbide vanished 3 days later. Tepiltson, the man who married a goddess and fed his people to her, was never buried, never mourned, because his story did not end. It was absorbed into something older, hungrier, and far from dead. Because gods don't fall, they wait. Centuries have passed since the fall of Xochimilco's empire, yet the shadow of the living goddess stretches across time like a slow-moving plague. Her story is buried beneath layers of history, myth, and silence, but her hunger remains. Modern Mexico, vibrant and alive, still carries whispers of her. In rural villages, mothers warn children not to wander near old ruins. Travelers speak of strange lights flickering over the canals at night, accompanied by distant, unnatural breathing. Farmers report their crops wilting without reason, livestock disappearing with no trace. And every so often, a child vanishes. No footprints, no cries, just silence. The temple's ashes were never found. The scar on the land, a scorched crater where it once stood, hides beneath thick jungles and city sprawl. But the temple was more than stone. It was a conduit, a mouth opening between worlds. And it never truly closed. Researchers who have studied the codices, bones, and cryptic scrolls agree. The goddess is not dead. She has become a force, a presence, that feeds on fear, silence, and sacrifice across generations. The question haunting scholars and believers alike is not if she will return, but when. The warnings carved in blood and whispered in shadow remain clear. The mouth will never close. She does not love. She only hungers. And in a world still shadowed by unspoken horrors and forgotten gods, that hunger might be growing. For now, the silence persists. But one day, someone will open the door. And when they do, the feast will begin again. If you found this story chilling, disturbing, or impossible to forget, don't forget to subscribe for more dark history that lurks beneath the surface of our world. Share your thoughts below. What do you think really happened to the living goddess? And if you want to dive deeper into forbidden histories and lost empires, watch our next video on the haunted ruins of Cahokia, where ghosts of the past refuse to rest. Remember, some doors are better left unopened. Thank you for listening.